In November 1943, the United States Military Command reached a pivotal and cold-blooded decision. They determined they would not launch a direct invasion of the formidable Japanese fortress on Bougainville. They would not engage in a grinder of attrition against the 40,000 battle-hardened soldiers entrenched within its dense jungles. Instead, the Allied forces resolved to erase them from the war entirely. They would not rely on bullets or artillery barrages to achieve this, but rather a new, silent weapon: total isolation. This is the account of how a single 7-day air offensive did not merely win a battle. It passed a death sentence. It was a judgment that left an entire army trapped within a 6,000 square mile jungle prison, cut off from civilization and left to be consumed by starvation, disease, and the wilderness itself. The tragedy did not begin on Bougainville itself, but on the small satellite island just to its north, Buka. This small strip of land was the strategic key, serving as the forward eyes for Rabaul, Japan's mighty fortress in the Pacific. From the airfields of Buka, Japanese Zero fighters provided essential air cover for every supply convoy attempting to reach the troops. Buka was the shield that kept the 40,000 men on Bougainville alive. The American logic was ruthless and simple. If Buka was blinded, Bougainville would starve. On November 1st, 1943, the execution of that sentence began. For 7 consecutive days, American air power unleashed a relentless, crushing offensive against Buka. It was not merely a raid, it was a systematic annihilation. Squadrons of P-38 Lightnings swept in at treetop level, hunting Japanese fighters on the ground and tearing them apart as they desperately tried to take off. This operation represented the ruthless heart of America's evolving, island-hopping strategy. General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz had identified the critical flaw in the Japanese fortress doctrine. The Japanese Imperial Army sought bloody, decisive battles for every island, hoping America would waste thousands of lives storming their bunkers. The new American plan was colder and more pragmatic. Do not attack the stronghold. Sever the arteries. The question was posed: why sacrifice 50,000 American lives to capture 40,000 Japanese soldiers when you can simply bypass them? Just as the smoke cleared from the air offensive over Buka, 14,000 U.S. Marines established a beachhead on Bougainville at Cape Torokina. However, they were not there to conquer the island. The Japanese commander, General Hyakutake, readied his 40,000 men for a massive, glorious counteroffensive, a battle for the very soul of the island. But for General Hyakutake and his legion, the world outside suddenly fell silent. The skies that once swarmed with protective Japanese Zeros were now empty, save for the constant, droning presence of American patrol aircraft. The garrison was now completely cut off. Every Japanese supply convoy that attempted to break through from Rabaul was spotted and annihilated long before it could reach the shore. American destroyers hunted them on the surface, while submarines stalked them from the depths below. Desperation set in. The Japanese command attempted nighttime airdrops of supplies, but the planes were shot down, their precious cargo of food and medicine falling deep into the impenetrable jungle, lost forever. In May 1944, Japan attempted one final desperate supply run. It failed. After that, there was nothing. No food, no medicine, no ammunition, and not even radio messages. From June 1944 onward, 40,000 men were completely, totally alone, walled in by an ocean they could not cross, and an airspace they could not challenge. The Americans did not need to tighten the noose. They simply walked away and let the jungle finish the job. Now the real war began. Not a war of bullets, but a brutal war of calories. Bougainville, 85% of which consists of mountains and rainforest, could not sustain 40,000 men. General Hyakutake issued one final order: live off the land. But there was no land to live off, only an endless 6,000 square mile green prison. Hope was the first casualty. For months, the soldiers clung to the belief that a relief fleet would arrive, but eventually, the radios went silent. By 1945, they understood the grim truth. Japan had forgotten them. They had been erased from the war. The army began to consume itself. Rations were cut to 1/3, then to nothing. Soldiers hunted rats, lizards, and snakes. They chewed on insects, dug up bitter roots, and boiled tree bark and leaves, some of which proved poisonous. Following the hunger came disease. Without medicine, simple jungle cuts festered into rotting, gangrenous wounds. In August 1945, the war finally ended. The news reached Bougainville via American radio transmissions, but many of the surviving soldiers refused to believe it, convinced it was a psychological trick. It took their own general speaking on a failing radio to confirm the reality: Japan had surrendered. The war was over. The survivors wept not because they had lost, but because they understood that their suffering had been meaningless. They had been dying for 2 years, for a war that was being fought and lost hundreds of miles away. On September 8th, 1945, the ghosts of the Imperial Army emerged from the jungle. 17,000 men walked, crawled, and were carried toward the American lines. The Marines waiting to receive them were stunned into silence. These were not soldiers. They were skeletons. Their bodies weighed barely 70 or 80 pounds. Their uniforms hung like rags, and their eyes were hollow. One Marine later remarked, "I thought they were prisoners from a concentration camp. I didn't know they were soldiers." The final outcome was severe. Of the roughly 40,000 personnel stationed on the island, more than half did not survive the long period of isolation that followed. Most lives were lost, not through direct confrontation, but because essential supplies, medical support, and communication were cut off. How could 7 days of air operations shape the fate of so many? Because survival in wartime depends not only on equipment, but on the steady flow of food, medicine, and logistical support. In November 1943, those 7 days disrupted the lifeline that sustained the entire garrison. From that point on, the island changed. What had once been a fortified outpost became a place completely cut off, where conditions steadily deteriorated. Many continued on for months, even years, but the direction of events had already been set. That is why Bougainville was remembered not simply as a battle, but as the beginning of a long, unavoidable decline.